like to welcome you to the first of what will be a series of weekly updates from now until launch. And normally we will probably be doing these on Thursday mornings at 11 o'clock. However, that depends greatly on what is happening with the scheduled work and the availability of the people to do it. We are trying to get the people who are closest to the program, and consequently those are the busiest people. And Don Phillips, who is to my left, who is chief of the Integrated Test Operations Division, is the person who is going to be working with us the most. And he will be talking to you today about the general status of the vehicle and how we're going to get from here to launch. And then on his left is Terry Williams, who is the chief of the Mechanical Systems Division, who will be telling you a little bit today about one of the major operations that needs to be done, which is the rebonding of the insulation on the external tank. And we'll start with Don Phillips.
Okay, thank you, Hugh. Basically, this is our understanding. It is an update of where we've been and where we're going to. And I'd like to say that we're all elated there with the FRF flight readiness firing. We thought certainly that was a good test. We did have the one problem that will be expounded on later, and that had to do with the external tank. But what we've been doing since FRF, which occurred on the 20th of February, we have been doing our post-FRF ops, and that includes our engine verification, re-verification, and also our system re-verification. Once we've gone through the vibration and so forth associated with the flight readiness firing, then we did want to go back and re-verify all of our subsystems. So we've been busy doing that. And in parallel with that, in order to work the tank problem, which Mr. Terry Williams is going to speak to later, we had a big RSS mod, and that's the rotating service structure that provides the access in order to get to those areas of the tank that have to be worked. So that has been going on in parallel with the engine re-verification. That work generally has taken about 12 to 13 days. It is on schedule. We're presently planning to rotate right now the RSS back to its extend position Saturday at noon. So we're looking for that to occur sometime tomorrow. Now, if that does occur, then we should be able to sometime Sunday get into our GN2 purge, and I don't want to usurp Terry here at all, but that is needed in order to get into the tank operation that we plan to do. Now, while we're going through that tank operation and making the necessary repairs there, we do have some testing going on that will be in parallel. The next major test that we plan to do is our launch readiness verification, and that should occur during the week of the 9th. And we would have the prime crew participating in that test. We plan to do a primary ascent run, a backup RTLS, that's a return to launch site, and also a descent run. So sometime during the week of March the 9th, and we hope to get into that test and get that completed. The big operation that we do the following week, and that should be the week of the 16th, would be our dry countdown demonstration test, and that is our final demonstration that we are ready for the terminal countdown. Again, we plan to do that operation with the prime crew, and we would go through the terminal sequence and verify that our timelines are right. It'd be very similar to the flight readiness firing, where we took part of the wet portion of the countdown demonstration test, but it was also a hazardous portion. This lets us do the crew interface where we don't expose the crew to that hazard. Again, in parallel with that operation, we will still be working the tank, which Mr. Terry Williams will get into. After the dry countdown demonstration test that we complete, we would go, hopefully, again, this is a highly successful oriented schedule, we would go in on March the 23rd and do 2 special cryo tanking tests. And that is to check out the TPS mod that we have made to the tank, and also we would look for the first time for a realistic loading operation that would be the same thing that we expect to see on launch countdown day. Assuming things are going well at that point, starting the week of the 30th, we would look into going into our countdown preps, and that would include our final ordnance operations as well as doing our dual load which is the cryogenic load for our fuel cells. Again, highly success-oriented. That should allow us to go near the first part of April into a 4-day countdown as planned now, subject to the approval of the launch director. And that would give us a launch on, again, a highly success-oriented, you don't stumble at all, the first week of April or sometime during the week of April the 6th would be the earliest launch date that we could predict. And so, Hugh, that's about the way we see it as far as our planned operations.
Okay. Thank you very much, Don. Now we'll have Terry Williams, who is Chief of Mechanical Systems Division. Terry?
Thank you, Hugh. In preparation for the repair of the tank, let's go back and review. You know, we do have a damaged area, 3 basic damaged areas on the tank, which comprise approximately 60 square feet. These 3 areas are broken up into one area approximately 45 square feet, the other area is approximately 12 square feet, and the other area 3 square feet. We'll be working these areas concurrently once we do get access. The rotating survey structure and the modification now taking place will provide that access to us. As Don mentioned, Saturday, hopefully Saturday, barring any problems, it will be rotated back. At that time, we'll position the new access platforms up and remove the cargo netting, which we now have around the damaged ablator panels. When we finish that job, we'll relocate the new panels, new platforms to the damaged areas of the ablator panels so we can start the removal effort. Concurrently, we'll be building environmental protection enclosures because in the process of reinstalling the insulation, we do have to have controlled environment, both inside the tank and externally in the environment around the ablator panels and the spray-on foam. So it'll be quite busy. We're utilizing 4 access platforms concurrently during the removal and reapplication of the insulation. For the removal process, that will be highly controlled. We will be first going and marking any identified damaged areas that we see once we can get very close to it. We'll be gridding the area up into small grid lines so that we can re-identify those panels that we take off, which we'll be taking them all off. When we take the panels off, we will be bagging them, shipping them back to the industrial area for a detailed examination of the problem that caused the original debonding, which has not yet been isolated to the exact cause. So we have a team of experts from the design center and the design agency at MAF here to participate in the examination of the panels we take off and try to resolve that problem. The panels will be removed. After we remove, we'll remove them in fairly large squares, bag them up, send them back to this area. We'll also look at the area under ultraviolet light to look at see if there's any hydrocarbon or other type contamination there. We'll be taking samples by wiping it and analyzing the wipes that we have to see if there's any material there. We'll also be utilizing some tape, put the tape on the primer, which is on the outside of the aluminum substrate, and doing a pull test to make sure that the bond strength is adequate, and we'll even make an examination of the thickness of the primer on the tank. All this will be done prior to starting the reverse process of reinstalling the ablator panels. Basically, we're talking about, as far as the ablator panels debonding, 17 panels that typically make up the reworked area. Like there's 12 in what we call Area 1, which is the largest, 3 in Area 2, and approximately 2, I believe, 2 in the lower area, and in Area 3 we call it. So in preparation for the bonding, of course, the ablator panels will be received, will be checked for quality and all other aspects. The surface of the tank will be primed to receive the adhesive that we're going to bond the ablator panels on with. Both the ablator panel and the substrate of the tank will have the adhesive applied after the primer for the adhesive has been applied and cured. Following that, the panels will be located. We will apply vacuum bags over the exterior of the slaw panels, the ablator panels, to pull them in place and keep them there during the curing process, which lasts 24 hours. Following the curing process for the ablator panels, we will start the foaming operation for the spray-on foam. And following that, once the foam is sprayed, we have to trim that down. And following the trim and its cure, then we basically do a top coat of fire-resistant latex paint. And that's essentially the operation. Hopefully we plan to do this in about 13 and a half days. And the only things I think we're optimistic about making that, things we would be concerned about would be real bad weather, extremely high winds, and in the event we ran into some surprises or problems that we hadn't anticipated once we get started in the operation. So I think that's basically it.
Okay, thank you. I think we're ready for questions. If I don't call on you by name, please give your name and your affiliation. We'll start with Dan Fiorucci right back in the back row, since it gives you the longest walk.
Has the thermal tiling, this I guess is for Mr. Williams, has the repair of the thermal tiles been in any way affected up to this point by the strike, the building of the scaffold, or the actual repair of the tiles?
It possibly could have been. I guess directly we have not seen that, we have not directly seen the impact of it yet, to my knowledge.
Has work on the scaffolding been delayed, though? It was my understanding that, you know, that was some area of concern, that perhaps management personnel would be a little bit slower than the normal personnel who would have done that job, and that was the main concern about a delay.
The primary, well, the delay we've had primarily, I think, on the new access platforms has been some degree weather and some degree the difficulty of the task. That was a specific contract, I believe, let to Catalytic Dow as opposed to the striking group. And I don't really think it was Catalytic Dow, I believe, that for the assembly job. I don't really think there's been a great effect there.
One final thing, how far are you behind now than you would have anticipated at the time of the FRF as of this moment in the repair work?
If I could address both of those questions, really, I think number one is the effect of the strike by BSI. Though we felt some initial impact, it has not affected the critical path. So you say from where we were at the time they went on strike to where we would be on launch day, that time has not changed. To say we have not been impacted on some work efforts, we have been, and we do feel it. But I think BSI management is coping with that very well, and to see that we don't affect the critical path.
And one of the areas where you're behind at the moment is the thermal protection repair.
Yes, but that's due primarily to technical problems, as Mr. Williams explained, and not anything related to the BSI strike.
Do you know how many days you're behind on that particular phase of preparation for launch at this point?
Well, the TPS repair, again, your question loses me somewhat, because that was a technical problem that occurred during the test of FRF, and we have probably affected FRF, or the launch date, by approximately, I would say, in the neighborhood of 2 weeks. That technical problem affected the launch date. As far as the BSI strike is concerned, there has been no effect at all on the launch date. And
TPS delayed the launch 2 weeks.
A combination, it's hard in this business to lay it on one particular item, but that definitely is a critical path to get to our next crawl load, which is a reproof of the tank, and repairing the TPS is in the critical path, and you would certainly have to say that that was the primary cause for delay of launch, though we're not too far from the launch date that we predicted prior to rollout from the OPF. I think, as most of you will recall, when we rolled out from the OPF, that we were predicting at that time a mid-March launch. We're now predicting somewhere, the earliest is the week of April the 6th. So you can see about where we are now as compared to where we were many, many weeks ago when we rolled out of the OPF. We're just not that far off, even with the hit that we have taken here with the TPS problem.
Today, we have with us Bill Scheck, who's sitting in the center, who is the shuttle test director, and Bob Sieck, S-I-E-C-K, who is a shuttle project engineer. And Mr. Schick is going to address some of the progress we've made since our last briefing and what is going to be happening during the coming weeks. And Mr. Seek is going to give you a little look at the dry CDDT and the countdown toward the launch. And we'll start with Bill Schick, and we'll take questions after both of them have spoken.
Okay, thank you. First statement I'd like to make is that the official STS-1 launch date is scheduled for sometime during the week of April 5th. And of course, we will establish the T0 day after we have completed successfully our dry CDT test. Also, our low pressure and high pressure external tank cryogenic loading test with a post-load TPS inspection that indicates that the external tank TPS is ready for launch. And not until we've basically passed those milestones successfully will we pin down the exact day. Since the last briefing that we've had, the items that have been completed, Sunday, March the 8th, we did complete the rotating service structure platform modifications for the external tank slaw repair, and the rotating service structure was extended to the vehicle. On Monday, we went into the external tank slaw repairs, and that at this time is scheduled to take 13 days and 1 shift. Today, we hope to wind up the test operations for the post-FRF shuttle systems test. That should be complete sometime this afternoon. Tomorrow on Friday at 3:30 p.m., we're going to have a test team call to stations for the start of the launch readiness verification test, which has 3 mission runs, and supporting that test will be the prime and backup crews. Then on Saturday, the first run, which is called the Pass Ascent Run, which is the primary avionics system software, we'll be scheduling T0 for 12 noon. On Sunday, we will have the second run, which is called the Pass Return to Launch Site Run, with a T0 at this time scheduled for 9 a.m. And then on Monday, we will have the backup flight software descent run with the T0 scheduled at 12 noon. On Tuesday, March 17th, at 8 p.m., T-minus 33 hours on the count clock, we will have a test team call to stations for start of the dry countdown demonstration test and the SRB HPU hot fire test. We'll work our way through the procedure on that test and arrive at T0 on Thursday, March 19th at 7:15 a.m. The prime crew will be participating in that test with their flight suits. We'll be doing everything as close to what we do on launch day with respect to the orbiter, the total shuttle configuration, and the crew in the cockpit. We have set the T0 time at 7:15 a.m. to give us lighting conditions similar to what they'll be on launch count day. On the 22nd, Sunday, we hope to have the external tank slaw repair complete. Once that is successfully completed, we will move into our external tank low pressure cryogenic load test. The purpose of this test is to check out the external tank thermal protection system repair work under maximum stress conditions. Also, along with that test, we will be retesting some LOX tank LH pressure transducers that had failed during the first external tank cryotanking test. After we complete the low pressure test, we have basically 2 days of TPS inspection, plus we require 2 days for the tank to go through a thermal stabilizing process. When we complete that satisfactorily, we'll pick up with the external tank high pressure cryogenic load, which will simulate the launch day conditions. When that's complete satisfactorily and the TPS is confirmed that it's ready for flight, we will pick up with the launch countdown preps. These include hazardous tasks such as APU, HPU servicing, ordnance operations, fixed service structure cryogenic dewar loading. And then when the preps are complete, we will be in a posture to start the launch countdown. Our call to stations starts at T-minus 73 hours. We do have 30.5 hours of contingency built-in holes, and we'll be looking forward to a liftoff time during the week of April the 5th at 6:50 a.m. In the morning. Hugh, that completes my
Okay.
abbreviated rundown of significant events yet to come to get to launch day.
Thank you, Bill. Bob Seek?
Okay, Bill covered the launch readiness verification, which is a series of mission simulations that we run with the vehicle and the flight crew. The other two major tests that are essentially the countdown orientation is the dry CDT. Now, we ran what we call the wet CDT, which culminated in a flight readiness firing, and in that test we duplicated the timeline down to T0 with the engine ignition, but we did not do those things which involve a direct interface with the flight crew, because that was essentially an unmanned operation. So the dry CDT essentially picks up, there's a minus count before crew ingress, but the real critical operation is from crew ingress, which is T minus 2 hours, down to the engine ignition and then the SRB ignition. This dry CDT will be with the flight crew, and the crew will see the same timeline and the same configuration in the vehicle and with the operation as they would on launch day. The platforms inside the cabin will be removed, the flight deck, and all of their communications with the ground team and the flight team in Houston will be as they were on launch day. And the difference, of course, from FRF was the vehicle for this test will be safe. There will be no main propellant cryogenics on board, and the test will terminate essentially at the time of engine ignition. And that timeline, of course, is going to be beneficial when we overlay it into launch countdown. We have not done this operation with this configuration with the prime crew until we do it in dry CDT. We're somewhat concerned about the timeline from crew ingress to T0, and this will verify our procedures and our interface with the crew. The launch countdown is, as Bill said, it's roughly a 3-day launch countdown, and we've put in some 30 hours of built-in holds around the critical operations when we load the fuel cell reactants, and of course prior to loading the main propellant cryogenics. And it also includes time for crew rest, test team rest during that 3-day operation. Hugh, that
Okay, thank you. We're ready for questions. If I don't call on you by name, please give your name and affiliation and wait for the microphone to get to you. We have Bill Cummings in the very back, Charlie.
Yesterday, there were some more panels that had come unglued on the main fuel tank. What's that going to do to your time schedule? How many more came unglued?
Okay, the original assessment on the debonding of the slaw from the external tank came after the first cryogenic loading. At that time, there were 17 panels debonded. I understand at this time that with the second loading, which was an FRF, the rotation of the platform back in place where we can get a closer look and go into the repair process, they have discovered, I believe, an additional approximately 14 panels that need some additional work. Now, this additional work does not mean that the total panel, the average size of these are 2 feet by 2 feet, has to be removed. Some of the debonding now is out on the peripheral areas where the original assessment was made. So you get into a situation where a 2 foot by 2 foot panel might only have a 2-inch by 2-inch debonding. That will be repaired in place. We still are investigating what it will take, but we do hope to be finished in the 13 days, 1 shift operation and be done by next Sunday.
Do you think those, that second batch that were debonded or unglued, that they came unglued on the original time, or did they do it on the second loading?
We cannot answer that because every panel that has been removed has gone through a failure analysis at this time, and until the failure analysis is complete, it really can't be stated as to whether it was during the first tanking or the second tanking.
Do you know yet what caused them to come unglued?
That is still part of the detailed failure analysis process. We do not have an explicit answer on what caused them. There's only theories. I'd rather not go into the theories at this time because one might be as good as the other. Until the investigation is complete, we will not know exactly.
Hey, here in the front, Charlie. Gary Whitaker from Channel 9.
Since the biggest problem with repairing the external tank was building platforms to get to them, to the heat panels, with the new panels that are debonded, is it going to take more platform work?
No, it is not. There's essentially three areas where the TPS has come, the slaw has become debonded. They're identified as 1, 2, 3. These additional panels are in those areas. I think there was an additional 2 in Area 1, and I'm sorry, 2 in Area 2, and 2 in Area 3, and Area 1 is still under investigation. Area 1 apparently has the most, but it is in the same areas accessible by the platforms that were installed on the rotating service structure.
Tell us where on the tank, and maybe in relation to the orbiter, the new debonding has been found.
Area 1, 2, and 3, if you can visualize the way the orbiter is attached to the tank with a forward attachment point, Area 1 is just slightly to the left and below that attachment point. Area 2 is slightly to the right below the attachment point. Area 3 is below Area 2. I believe most of the debonding has been additional in all areas, but like I said, Area 2 and 3, the total inspection is complete. Area 1 is still being looked at this time.
Are there any additional questions here? Peter Larson from the Sentinel.
Yeah. Is that repair work going on 24 hours a day, and how many technicians does that involve actually on the pad?
It is a 24-hour day, around-the-clock operation since we started Monday through completion, and anticipated completion sometime next Sunday. As far as the total number of technicians, you have to realize that the work area is quite cramped and small. There is not a large amount of space between the bottom of the orbiter and the skin of the external tank, so the physical size of the area limits the number of people we can have working in there. I do not know the exact number, but we do have people working off 3 different platforms. I would say physically working on the platforms, you're looking at maybe 3, 4 people max, but then of course you have to realize there's other people supporting that logistically in other areas working as well.
Go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, if I could be allowed one more question. I'd heard that Alan Lovelace is now saying, I might be misinformed, I'm not sure. Alan Lovelace is now saying that the launch will be no earlier than the 8th, or no earlier than the 8th or the 9th. And the previous date, I think, had been no earlier than April 7th. Is there any verification on that, or?
There has not been, as Bill mentioned earlier, a specific date that was mentioned. We only have target assessments, which we do here, and we will not set a date until then. He mentioned the 8th or 9th, I believe, when talking to Congress or something about possible days, and the 8th or 9th is still in the week of April 5th, and it's just as good as any other day in that particular week. Did you have your hand up before, Dave? Dave, or Gordon did? Gordon Harris from Reuters.
The Philadelphia Inquirer, February 18th, carried a story at some length about the situation at the Cape as it is today, and quoted Mayor Murphy of Cape Canaveral, who I understand works somewhere in NASA, Kennedy Space Center, as saying that he's unhappy because you lack the military discipline, and you have a number of younger engineers who are rebellious. Do you know of any rebellious engineers in NASA?
Well, speaking from the standpoint of the test team in the firing room, and of course the number of hours a lot of us put in there, I would say that's not to be the case. Yes, we do have younger engineers on the program. There's a lot of faces around that we didn't see back in Gemini and Apollo, but there's no sense of rebellion there. There's a case where we do have to, those of us that have been in this a long time, have to bring up the speed, the newcomers, so to speak. But these people are, as far as their professional attitude and their ability is concerned, there's nothing, from our standpoint, there's nothing lacking there. And the flight readiness firing is a good example It was our first major test where a lot of people had to do the right things, develop the procedures, and react to some critical situations in real time, and they did it. And they did it quite well.
Okay, in the back of the auditorium.
Yes, John Morrissey from Channel 6. I wonder if you could show us on the model, since we have it there, where the debonding, the new debonding has been found in those 3 areas.
All right. As I was saying, I'll turn around this way. The areas that are being tracked in the debond work that is going on at this time is identified as an area 1, 2, and 3. Area 1 is basically just below the attachment point here and comes down several feet below this area. And here, area 2 is the equivalent area on the other side of the attachment point, and area 3 is right below that.
Okay, the gentleman back here.
Malcolm Brown, New York Times. I wonder if the engineers have made any calculation of approximately how much surface area could be exposed without insulation during launch before you reach some sort of catastrophic failure, flash boil of the hydrogen or something like that.
I don't think I could answer that. Maybe someone on the Marshal Loop could. But
we can get that answer for you. We don't really have a enough space up here to have an expert in each area, and these 2 gentlemen are not the external tank experts. So why don't we'll get that answer for you. Dave Bailey up here in the 2nd row. Charlie. Wait, Dave.
The first time you tanked it, a certain number of panels came loose. You think that the 2nd time you tanked it, more panels came loose. Is it not likely, if you do determine that the 2nd time you tanked it, more panels came loose, it could be possible the 3rd time you tank it, even more? And my question from all this is, if you determine that, isn't it possible that all the panels would have to come off and have to be rebonded? And if that were the case, how long would that take?
Well, first of all, that's not the case. Hopefully in the failure analysis it'll be proven that something happened to these particular panels in the manufacturing process due to the preparation of the surface in the area that these were bonded to, or the lot of cement per se that was applied to put these panels on. And the first tanking basically started an area that debonded, and possibly the 2nd tanking, because these first ones debonded slightly, has propagated just slightly. This total process that we're going through, all the panels are being looked at this time and going through an assessment to make sure that they have not debonded either, and they will be looked at again after 2 more stringent cryo-tanking tests. So I can safely say that when we commit this to launch countdown, we will say that the panels on the external tank are satisfactory for flight.
And if, my other question is, when the vehicle is launched and it's in the air, if one of these panels did come off in flight, would it not be very difficult for ground control or the astronauts to know that one of the panels came off?
Well, visually, it would be impossible. From a sensor standpoint, it depends where temperature sensors are, and I do not know the exact location of all temperature sensors. You'd have to depend on that. But we're going success-oriented, and we're not going to commit to launch countdown until we're assured that these panels are not going to come off.
Okay, we'll have one more question here, and then we'll go to the other centers. Dan Fiorucci.
Just briefly, do you know whether all the panels that debonded were due to thermal shock, and how many panels in all now are you going to have to replace?
Yeah, Dan, you missed the beginning of the press conference, so we'll go over that with you later. We're going to go to the Johnson Space Center, and we'll come back here later. Johnson, do you have any questions there?
Any questions? This is Johnson. We have no questions, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Marshall, are you up, and do you have any questions?
This is Marshall. We do have questions.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, Dave Dooling with the Times. Just two questions. One, exactly at what point will you be starting to put the replacement panels on the tank, or when did it start? Two, what is the status on the software fix so that the GLS won't get itself confused about the power up on the booster HPUs?
Yeah, I'll answer the first question, and then Bob will answer the second. We do plan to start reapplying panels to the external tank sometime late this afternoon.
Okay, on the ground launch sequencer, which again going back to FRF, did shut down the HPUs prematurely in that there was not an HPU failure that would have triggered the shutdown. The GLS software has been recoded. We've taken it out to Houston and run it against the SAIL model back there, and brought it back here and run it against our firing room. And of course now we're ready to support the dry CZT test, which will bring up the HPUs just as we will in Launch Countdown.
Okay, thank you. No more questions from Huntsville.
Hey, thank you. NASA headquarters. Do we have anybody at NASA headquarters today?
Hello. Yeah, Al Rossiter, UPI. What was the date for the high-pressure load test?
The tentative date, but that's contingent on successful completion of the dry countdown demonstration test, is scheduled right now for the time frame of approximately March 26th.
Yeah, this is Harry Rosenthal, AP. If you're not certain as to what caused the panels to come off in the first place, how do you know that putting them on this afternoon you will have fixed what the problem was?
There's been a very extensive test program run at the NASA MSDF facility to go back in these same areas to go through a bonding process. I would have to assume slightly different than the original bonding process, with tanking tests run after new panels have been bonded in these exact areas. So that is the confidence that we're using at this time for the new procedure we're using to reapply. Obviously, in the process, the theories on why they came off are in a rank order, and I'm sure that those that are most logical for why they debonded, that situation has been corrected as well.
One more thing on the tiles, on the panels. Are they glued on, and what kind of a glue is it if they are?
We
cannot answer that in detail. I think your satisfaction. You can add to that.
We will get that answer for you. Actually, I think there's an external tank person at headquarters probably who can answer that in some detail. But if not, give us a call at our office here, which is area code 305-867-2468, and we'll get the answer for you. Are there any additional questions at headquarters?
Yes, thank you. Howard Benedict of AP. Try to get a little clarification on Al's question. What are the precise target dates for both tests? You just mentioned the 26th, but the tests, I understand, are going to be about 3 days apart.
The target date for the low-pressure test is March 23rd. High-pressure test, March 26th.
Another question. Your platforms don't give you access to the entire external tank, so how are you assured that maybe there aren't some problems in some other areas that you can't reach?
Well, we built the platforms to assess the areas where we have shown that we have debonding. The total tank has been inspected. The thermal protection panels are only on the side of the tank between the orbiter and the tank itself. There's no tiles at any other location. So we have gone through a thorough inspection process.
Nancy Smart from VOA. Can you give us an idea of the condition of the lake bed at Edwards now?
No. My understanding is that it has been drying very nicely. The report was yesterday, and that they were expecting that it would be able to support a launch in the week of April 5th. However, that's something that, will get looked at and depends on whether it rains some more or not. Any additional questions?
Headquarters has no further questions.
Okay, thank you. There's a couple more questions here, I believe. Who had their hand up? Peter Larson from the Sentinel.
Is there any kind of estimate or projection on how much these repairs are costing and who will be accountable or who will bear the expense of these repairs? Is Martin Marietta the...
That's something we'll have to get the answer for you, Peter. Gordon Harris, and we'll have one more question after this.
Is there any impact on your launch preparations caused by the strike?
Negative, not at this time.
Okay, are there any additional questions? If not, then Bill Cummings wants one last question.
Bill, give us a fast rundown on the CDDT, on where we go from here right through the end of the CDDT, what the schedule is.
If I understand your question, you want me to... Another summary of what I started out with?
Just a summary of where the CDDT...
You want to go from where we are today to get to CDDT?
Through the end of the CDDT.
Okay, as I mentioned, we are going through the launch readiness verification test, which is 3 days, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. We do hope to have... Then we go into the, call stations for the dry CDT on Tuesday and have that next Thursday, so that's basically it. Launch readiness.
The countdown is going to run 3 days, right? CDDT?
Yes, that's right. From the time we have call stations till we hit T0.
How much plus time are you going to run?
We stop at about T-minus 2 seconds.
Okay, thank you all for coming. We will have another weekly date next week, probably on Thursday, and that's going to be worked in real time along with our tests. So we will announce it 1 or 2 days ahead of time. Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to this press briefing, even though it's called in very short time. But I'm sure you're very anxious to hear from Dr. Alan Lovelace, who is the acting administrator of NASA, and John Yardley, who is the associate administrator for the Space Shuttle. And we'll begin with Dr. Lovelace.
Thank you. For the help of the people who are not present here, let me just quickly read the statement that I think most of you that are present here have already read. We have completed a comprehensive flight readiness review today. In general, I think the review was very, very clean. The Kennedy Space Center launch team is continuing to target for a launch on April 10th. And I want to emphasize that the April 10th date could change for a variety of reasons, such as weather constraints at both the launch and landing sites, work off of items in the at the launch site, and assurance that recommendations of the review board investigating the March 19th accident at the pad can be implemented. We'll continue to assess our readiness for launch. There's a couple of major checkpoints along the way. We'll pick up the countdown now scheduled for Sunday, April 4th, and the launch minus 2-day review represents one of those major milestones. And that will be held on April 8th under the current schedule.
Hey, thank you. Mr. Yardley, did you wish to say anything before we go to questions?
Just one comment on Al. I think it should be April 5th is the count pickup.
Sunday.
Sunday. Yeah.
Sunday.
Yeah,
correct.
That is
correct.
That's right.
Sunday, April 5th.
Okay, we're ready for questions. We have people in each of the centers who may ask questions, so we'll go to them soon. And Dr. Lovelace needs to get a plane, so this is going to be fairly short. And we'll start with Gary Whitaker.
I'm sorry I'm so casual, but you caught me off guard.
I'm envious.
The review board investigating the accident, any preliminary information, and do you expect impact on the launch date from that?
I do not really have any preliminary indications. What we are going to do is, of course, assure that all the appropriate safety measures to support the first shuttle launch are implemented and redress any deficiencies that the investigating board calls to our attention. I don't expect right now that will prove to be a delay in this targeted schedule that I mentioned. But I think it's a prudent thing that for us to do, and we plan to address that.
Rob Zaya.
What are the major considerations that went into your adopting the April 10th recommendation, and actually what are the odds of actually launching the space shuttle on April 10th?
Well, let me clarify a technicality. What I said was that we're targeted for the 10th, and that the Kennedy Space Center team is still working to that targeted date. I think Mr. Yardley has to have the opportunity to review this week that total schedule of work to be completed, and then in turn to make a recommendation to me, which I can address at that time, and I expect that's going to happen by this coming weekend.
Well, this is not an official launch date. This is just a target date still?
This is still a target date that we're working to. I would say, and maybe John, I don't want to preempt John on this because I think he has to have the opportunity to look at that, but based on the flight readiness review just completed, it would appear that that's a good target date to work to. But as is the case normally, there are some open work items that Mr. Yardley needs to have the opportunity to satisfy himself that they can be closed satisfactorily, and in turn make a recommendation to me that in fact we adopt the 10th or some date for the launch date.
Well, Mr. Yardley, what are the major considerations then on your mind, or that you will be looking over?
Well, of course, there's the normal work that's scheduled between now and launch, which things like putting in the cameras and all this stuff. Of course, that doesn't represent any threat, but you can always get behind on some of that stuff. As far as review items, very little came out of the review. There's one problem we're still want to do some more analysis on, and that was during the flight readiness firing, measuring hydrogen in the aft fuselage. We got a little higher reading than we like. Now, the reading we got is perfectly satisfactory and within spec, but we want to understand it a little better. So that one's still open. That's an example of the kind of thing we're talking about.
Okay, Craig Cavalt in the first row from AvWeek.
John or Al, what role will the factor that George Page wants to have about a day's worth of rest play in the decision here? You've about gobbled that up right now for a 10th liftoff. Did George argue strongly for maintaining a day's rest?
Well, let me respond to that, and then John can amplify it. In the course of the flight readiness review, George did not argue strongly for just having a day's rest in there. I think that it is important, though, as Mr. Yardley's indicated, for him to have an opportunity to look at all the work, most of which is routine, at least routine for this kind of business, and satisfy himself that that schedule supports that, both in terms of the work to be done and any crew rest considerations.
As a matter of fact, we specifically asked George in the review if he was concerned about having slipped some work into the day that we had sort of target Sunday for a day off. When we set that target a week or so ago, we put an extra day in it just because we might slip on something. We wanted to have something that was fairly firm, and we said, now, if nothing slips, we'll take the day off. The actual fact is George has built into his count from Sunday to Friday a lot of holds. So he is not concerned. I believe if you talk to him, you'll get that answer.
Okay, Peter Larson from Sentinel.
How long did the review actually last, the number of hours? And do you always smoke cigars, or is this apropos of the announcement?
Well, let me see if I can reconstruct how many hours we spent in the review. I guess we spent about 10 hours yesterday and an additional 3 hours this morning, so there was probably about 11 hours or 13 hours of review time. And the cigar is not to signify anything special about this press conference.
Just smokes less cigarettes.
I just smoke less cigarettes when I smoke cigars.
Dave Bailey from Today in the second row.
How does California look for a landing right now?
Looks good. Again, that was a topic that was discussed during the flight readiness review, and I think that we project, weather notwithstanding, of course, which we have no control over, that the Edwards site will be up and ready to support a nominal 10 April launch.
Back to Craig Cavalt.
Yeah, I'd like to pursue a couple things that have already come up in terms of deciding on whether or not to call a station Sunday night. Are you going to have a milestone such as Saturday morning where you're going to say, this is the day we're going to weigh it? Go through that a bit further. Weather obviously is always a factor, but play it from the hardware side.
Well, I think, Craig, you know us too well to know that we're going to drift through this without some schedule. We, in fact, do plan to look at this on Friday and Saturday of this week, and I think should be, it's my expectation anyway, that we should be in a position by the weekend or by Monday, certainly to affirm that the targeted launch date is in fact our choice of launch dates.
Aside from weather, can you be more specific on any work on the pad you're specifically looking at that could threaten call a station Saturday night?
Well, I think beside the things that have already been mentioned and the topics that John brought up, most of it is routine. Nothing really comes to my mind. I think that they'll, if George Page were here, I'm sure he could give you a long laundry list of work that is on his plate. But I'm sure there is some additional last-minute work on the vehicle to be done, and along with all of the pre-countdown activities that I think you know about and are available to you.
And one last thing, again, on your accident investigation review or the dump of the final report, is the potential for the delay there just getting the documentation to the folks involved with pad operations and so forth on communications procedures, making sure they understand what new procedures, if any, they should follow? Is that your...
Yeah, let me clarify that I do not expect to get a final report from the investigations board this week. What I am anxious to do is to get any recommendations that the board may have relative to the processes and procedures that will be employed for the STS-1. And then in turn to, along with Dick Smith and John Yardley, assure that the appropriate actions are being implemented to redress any deficiencies that may come out of that. I really can't speculate at this time what areas they'll fall in, but I suspect they'll look at all areas, communication and training and everything.
Bill Cummings in the back.
Florida is coming into the time of the year now where there's a thunderstorm just about every afternoon. Just how quick...
Well, I think the weather constraints for the first flight are fairly critical. And John may wish to amplify on it, but I think that in the final analysis, that will be the constraint that is most likely to cause us to hold or to delay. And it's clear that we need good weather here. We need good weather at the primary and alternate landing sites. And as you observe, it is not easy to get that kind of a day across the country. John, do you want to?
Well, first off, April weather is better than March across the board statistically when you take all of our constraints into consideration. Afternoon thunder showers don't bother us too much because we want to go in the morning. However, thunderstorms, when we're getting in the launch time, are bad news. So that would be a constraint.
The afternoon thunderstorms then could possibly force you to clear the pad and might cause a delay. Is that what you're saying?
That's possible, but not on launch day. In other words, launch day, we're going to go for...
-1.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, Dave Bailey.
For your poor motel owner that's been pulling his hair out and saying, when the hell are they going to get down here? I mean, what are the chances of April 10th? I mean, should he... Can the guys in Cocoa look for people to start coming down here, or?
Well, I think, and I'm sympathetic to the problem that you have. I think we all have, in fact, share the same problem. I think that the 10th is a good target date. That, given that I were in the media, I would lay my plans to be here. But let me add one other thing. Coming off this discussion on the weather, I'd pack more than one white shirt.
I've had a note that there'll be no questions from the off-site centers. However, we had one called in from Everly Driscoll at ICA in Washington, asking both Dr. Lovelace and John Yardley, in a few sentences, could you comment on the magnitude of the technical achievement which you feel the shuttle represents?
Well, let me lead off, and I don't think that there's any question that the shuttle represents a tremendous technical achievement for the United States. And it's interesting to look back when you consider that the basic design for this vehicle was laid down some 9 years ago, John. That even today it represents a highly sophisticated, integrated system which will represent and does represent a tremendous accomplishment, and I think a tremendous reflection on the capability of the U.S. industry and the government team that has brought us to this point.
Mr. Yardley?
Well, I agree with what Al said. I'd just like to say that the shuttle is a tremendous technical advance in the state of the art. It's far beyond currently anything else in the world. As far as an advance, I don't consider that its leapfrogging off of Apollo is any more significant than the Apollo leapfrog off of what it took from. But there's a big difference in the fact that Apollo's objective was a demonstration kind of thing, whereas the technology that's built into the shuttle is going to really pay off for the nation economically in far-reaching ways. It'll make the use of space just really commonplace, and that's the real value of the shuttle.
Okay, are there any Gordon Harris from Reuters?
Does the strike currently in progress here give any of you pause?
In relation to, certainly a strike always gives us pause, but in relation to the launch schedule, I think right now our assessment is an expectation that it will not be a significant factor in impact the activities that need to be completed leading up to first launch.
Peter Larson, we'll have one more question then.
Just for the sake of clarification, delineating the actual countdown, it's 73 hours and would start including hold time when?
What's the hours?
Well, it's 73 hours not including hold time, and the hold time extends that, I don't know, 106, 108 hours, something like that. The count will pick up, I believe it's 10 o'clock Sunday night, 11:30, for a launch at 7 o'clock Friday morning, so however many hours that is. That includes about 34 hours of hold, something on that order.
Okay, Ed Pipp from Detroit News with the last.
What is the launch time? You say 7 o'clock. I heard it was 6:50. Is there any definite launch time?
Well, normally, I guess it's 45 minutes after sunup.
7 is a round number.
7 is a good round number.
Okay, thank you all for coming. Thank you, gentlemen, for taking time off.
Oh, yeah. Well, they won't leave you out.